So the next speaker is Martie Underwood. She is a transpersonal psychologist from South Africa, and she works with Ibogaine, and she is doing research on peak experiences and transpersonal psychology. So she's going to talk to us about the archetypal journey. Please welcome Martie.
Thank you so much, Lakshmi. And I was really smiling when you were mentioning the fire walk. That's an experience that I've done that I thought was a really interesting experience to have. Thank you so much for hosting this event. I think it's an exquisite pleasure to have the opportunity to talk about the science and the mysticism of peak experiences. As Lakshmi mentioned, I hold a master's degree in MSc in transpersonal psychology, and I also have a background in herbal medicine. I'm currently studying towards my PhD in psychology, and Ibogaine is my research topic. I own and operate an Ibogaine center in South Africa called the Magalies Wellness Center. We primarily treat substance use disorders, but we also work with psychological disorders, and we facilitate psychospiritual journeys for clients who are interested in working with Ibogaine. The last thing I want to mention is I'm a very proud professional affiliate of something called the Galileo Commission. The Galileo Commission represents 90 advisors and 30 universities. And the aim of the commission is to expand science to accommodate and explore important human experiences and questions that science in its present form is unable to integrate. I've really focused my talk today on the types of peak experiences that we can have. So if you'll indulge me just from an academic perspective to have a look at what peak experiences really are. Abraham Maslow was the first person to articulate the concept of peak experiences, and he articulated it as powerful, meaningful experiences in which individuals transcend the self to be one with the world and to feel completely self-fulfilled. According to Maslow, there are 16 aspects of a peak experience, and many of these can be cultivated through daily rituals and mental training even. Peak experiences profoundly shift a person's thinking. It can bring about a strong sense of purpose, a sense of purpose and fulfillment. Peak experiences range in spectrum, and they can be very simple activities or they can be intense transformational events. And common triggers for peak experiences are art, nature, sex, creative work, music, psychedelics, religious experiences, and even scientific discovery. Now, later in his career, Maslow made a distinction between what he called classic peak experiences and plateau experiences. Plateau experiences are a fallout from illuminations, insights, and other experiences. And the result is a kind of unitive consciousness, which is simultaneously a perception of the sacred and the ordinary. Now, plateau experiences are about becoming mythic, poetic, and symbolic about ordinary things. The idea that one lives in a world of miracles all the time. This type of consciousness has certain elements in common with peak experiences, like awe, mystery, or surprise, but they are also quite different in the sense that they are constant rather than climatic. So plateau experiences, and Maslow further contrasted plateau experiences with peak experience by saying that plateau experiences are voluntary, while peak experiences are involuntary. Plateau experience are more long-lasting in their serenity, and peak experience have sort of a quick, climatic, orgasmic nature to the nature of the experience. Plateau experiences are also essentially more cognitive in nature, as opposed to the emotional intensity that you experience with a peak experience. It's more about the mundane plateau experiences rather than the mystical, which is more about peak experiences. Transcendence, then, if you look at plateau experience, transcendence can mean to live in this realm of plateau living. After the insight or the great conversion or the great mystic experience or the great illumination or the great full awakening, one can calm down as the novelty disappears. And as one gets used to good things or even great things, live casually in heaven and with the internal and the infinite. That's the way that Maslow articulated plateau experiences. In plateau cognition, one becomes perfect. In that moment, I can love and accept all. I can forgive all, and I can be reconciled even to the evil that hurts me. I can understand and enjoy the way things are. And I can even feel some subjective equivalent of what has been attributed to godlike qualities: omniscience, omnipotence, and ubiquity. Flow experiences, on the other hand, are not classic peak experience, but they demonstrate some similarity with peak experiences. Flow is a state of mind in which the person becomes fully immersed in the activity. Being immersed brings about a state of focus in which the person is completely absorbed. During flow, the ego falls away and time flies. Every action, movement, and thought follows from the previous thought. Your whole being is involved, and you're using your skills to the utmost. Flow experiences occur in different ways for different people, and it often occurs when you're doing something that you enjoy and something at which you are quite skilled at. So Ibogaine as a peak experience then. The experience of Ibogaine really taps into the realm of the archetypal experience. It's a symbolic medium of imagery that can assume great beauty and reveal the deeper meaning of myth. Ibogaine facilitates communication with the self. It reaches each of us beyond the masks that we hold up for ourselves. It facilitates the experience of seeing things the way that they are, rather than colored by the bias of our imagination, our prejudice, or even sometimes the subconscious projections. Ibogaine facilitates a form of spiritual tranquility. Whereas a person in normal waking consciousness can be prone to feeling rushed, anxious about the experience of time and effort, Ibogaine, and even following the Ibogaine experience, especially following the Ibogaine experience, it brings a peacefulness at the certainty that the whole world, of which we are both a spectator and a part, is experientially within myself. It is not something that is remote or mysterious. It's something that I already know how to tap into. I'm going to give you just a little bit of insight into my first peak experience to round off the last bit of my presentation. My first peak experience happened in my early 20s during a shamanic journey, which I wasn't expecting at the time. The purpose of the journey was to look for a spirit guide. And it was facilitated by a shaman. So I went into the lower world looking for a spirit guide to help me with a specific issue. I found my spirit guide. And as I was expecting to sort of leave the desert landscape where I'd found my spirit guide tugged me into a different direction and told me that he had something else that he wanted to show me. He took me up into the sky and into the cosmos. In this experience, I saw what he articulated to me as the nature of reality, the way that time folds in onto itself. It showed me the connectedness of everything, the light that represents the essence of the soul, of each of us alive on this planet, and the cosmic connectedness of these lights, of these souls in this awareness. This experience profoundly changed me in my early 20s, and it changed my understanding of where I'm headed, who we are, and what my role is in all of this. I think most profoundly what it showed me is that time is utterly meaningless. Time does not matter whether it's lived this lifetime or the next lifetime. It's completely meaningless. And as Lakshmi also said, I think it takes the sting out of every small little decision that you need to make if you understand that there is a whole lot of time that you can do all of this in. Each of us exists as our own deliberate manifestation of the God consciousness, I think is what I mostly gained from this journey. And that's all I have to share with you today. Thank you very much.
Can you speak a little bit about what your how that shaped what you do in the world today? Because you said that experience that you had.
I think, that first peak experience, and I've always been interested in altered states of consciousness and experimented with psychedelics very early on in my life, and then took a very long break from psychedelics and came back to it and really tried and worked with and explored different modalities for for exploring altered states of consciousness. So it's something I think I've always been interested in. You know, as a student of psychology, mainstream psychology does not really accommodate altered states as a research topic necessarily. So I think that experience in my early 20s really pushed me into transpersonal psychology, which is the only language in psychology that can articulate, understand, and explain in a scientific way what people are experiencing during an altered state and how that knowledge is meaningful to the person in their everyday life. You know, in psychedelics, and I think that goes for all altered states of consciousness, people really talk about the integration thereof as probably the most important aspect. I think the peak experience itself absolutely is life-changing in terms of a leap in your own consciousness. But that is only worth anything really in your living experience or your lived experience if you're able to bring back what you gain from that experience so that it enriches your life. I think the shift happens regardless, but how deliberately people work with that shift, I think is really how we can access the value of peak experiences. And to have the language and to have the tools and to have some guidance to say, well, how do you integrate and make use of peak experiences in the way that they were intended. I think that's what really drew me to the work that I do now, is helping to try and find that language for people to decode what they experience and to take forward and to integrate the lessons from an altered state.
Dorina is asking, if you were to experience other entheogens, which ones would you choose and why?
I have a list of favorites. Ibogaine is at the top of my list, just because I think it's extremely profound. I really like working with MDMA. I think MDMA is a profoundly effective substance in the psychotherapeutic context. I think ayahuasca is hugely, hugely valuable for me personally and for personal growth. I like balancing the masculine and the feminine. So I knock on the doors of the masculine plants and I knock on the doors of the feminine plants. And then I knock on the doors of the children. To me, mushrooms and psilocybin are a little bit like naughty children. To find a balance in all of them. I think each of the medicines really bring their own value and their own lessons. So I don't exclude anything. Even working with LSD and DMT, I've seen some of the most profound shifts happen for people from those substances. So it's really about what somebody needs at a particular point in their life, which substance can facilitate that process. Sometimes, you know, as a facilitator of this work, you get it wrong. You suggest psilocybin, and what actually helps it move for somebody from a therapeutic perspective is MDMA. So, you know, it's about intuitively trying to tap into what somebody needs, what will be most useful for somebody to work with, and to try and work with that substance. For me personally, the same logic applies. You know, if I find an obstacle in my life and I can't navigate around it, that's really when I call on the plants to help me gain a better understanding of what I'm dealing with.
Oh, thank you, Marty, for your really great presentation today. We really enjoyed hearing you talk about Maslow and how some of his theories have informed your life and your work. I've also been a fan of his work, and we'll be talking about that later in my presentation. But I'm curious to hear from you. I think part of his theory on peak experiences was that it's only a small minority of people who have naturally occurring peak experiences. And with psychedelics kind of and entheogens becoming more mainstream, I wonder, I heard a Pew survey that said something like it's only 20% of people in the United States self-identify as ever having had a mystical type experience before. And I wonder, as psychedelics become more mainstream and that number rises, what does that do to to culture?
It's a very interesting question. Thank you so much for asking that. I think at the time when Maslow articulated peak experiences, Maslow operated in the 60s and the 70s, which is really only the psychedelic revolution, I would say. When I look at Maslow's work and read back on it, what strikes me is that as a society, I really believe that we've experienced a profound shift in awareness and in consciousness. And I think technology has enabled that, but I think psychedelic use in the years that it was prohibited, and certainly now as we're all waking up to psychedelic experiences as well, that there is a shift in consciousness. And perhaps at the time when Maslow articulated this work, way ahead of his time in many respects, and many of the work that he put out, most great teachers, I think, are perhaps people were not as ready as they are now. And the feeling that I get is that we're really ready for this. So if more people have peak experiences naturally, I believe it's because we've shifted in consciousness and awareness already. I believe psychedelics play a huge role in helping to facilitate that. And I don't believe it's such an exclusionary type of experience anymore. I believe we've moved on from that point in history where having a peak experience, it's more of an inclusive experience in terms of how our awareness as a society is moving along. Will there be people who will not have them? Absolutely. There will always be people who are not ready for them in this lifetime or another, perhaps. But I believe that more people are tapping into these experiences and are ready for these experiences, as opposed to perhaps when Maslow was doing this work. I have the most beautiful story of a young man who is 28 years old, and he's arriving tomorrow for a booster treatment. I treated him about 14 months ago for opioid addiction. From the time that he was 15 until the age of 27, he had been in 16 rehab facilities. He had been very badly treated in some of those, really physically abused in some of those, really bad facilities. And he had never managed to kick his opioid addiction. He came to us for a flood dose. It was not easy. It never is easy working with Ibogaine for opioids even. But he did the single flood dose, and it's been 14 months and he's been completely clean. He's not touched an opioid in 14 months. I think working with psychedelics has really strengthened his journey and really helped him to stay clean. He worked a lot with LSD. He worked a lot with DMT on his own, and he's coming back tomorrow just for a booster dose to say, I want to experience Ibogaine not being addicted to opioids and not being in that detox kind of way, but really just experiencing Ibogaine for what it can give me and that bit of a reset type of effect that Ibogaine does. And we hear stories like this all the time. It really, really works. It's not the Ibogaine that works, it's Ibogaine with the person at the right time in their life and the right place, really wanting to move on from that place in their life. Ibogaine is the thing that makes it possible.
Does it really work? How well is it working if people have to keep coming back and doing it over and over again?
I don't think it's about having to come back to do it over and over again. I think it's about wanting to come back and do it over and over again. What I've seen with heroin and opioids, heroin is like a smothering mother. It really, really suffocates you in a way that seems loving, but is extremely suffocating. And what I see with people who relapse after Ibogaine is very often it's the mental sort of crutch on this idea of a smothering mother. Is she going to love me one more time, or is she going to cast me aside? And that's what people are curious about. So there's nothing in life that is a switch that you can flick once and it works perfectly. Like, things don't work that way. You really have to work at them. And for this young man who's coming back, it's not out of necessity that he's relapsed back on opioids and need another Ibogaine treatment. He's curious about what else he can explore in his own mind, in his own spirituality with Ibogaine without having to detox from an opioid, which changes the experience significantly.
Wow, thank you, Margie and Lakshmi. That was incredible sharings about Iboga, which I have been always interested in. But due to the legality issues, which are in so many places and abroad as well, the one actually that prevented me from doing so was more the access to it. And I know friends in the US who have literally gone to clinics in Mexico where they experience Iboga and DMT for all those issues that you mentioned, including addiction and others as well. What's the current status with the access? Is it only available underground? Are there ways for others to sign up in trials or in clinics in the US? And how do you see it changing in the near future?
Okay, there are a couple of things happening with Ibogaine. So the legal status, first of all, most first world countries, the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia, etc., Ibogaine is illegal. A lot, sort of the developing world where I'm from in South Africa, it's a Schedule 6 substance, so it is scheduled, but it is not illegal to work with Ibogaine. And similarly in other parts of the world, I believe Costa Rica, I think Mexico, obviously, I think New Zealand, it's legal to work with, although I think there are some restrictions. So it's different in different parts of the world as far as legality goes. I think Ibogaine is a very contentious substance to work with because it is not risk-free and because people have died taking Ibogaine under the wrong conditions. Now, Jeffrey Camlett has showed to all of us, I think he's really, you know, a veteran of the Ibogaine community who's never had a safety incident in the years and years and years that he's worked for Ibogaine for a few reasons. You know, you screen medically, you screen psychologically to make sure that there are no underlying conditions that prevent somebody from undergoing the Ibogaine experience. And co-consumption of substances is a huge problem in unregulated areas. And that's why the medical supervision with an Ibogaine treatment is extremely important to make sure that there are no underlying conditions that exclude you from an Ibogaine treatment, or, you know, that there's not some kind of Wild West situation where people are co-consuming substances while Ibogaine is active in their body. And I think from that perspective, because it is contentious, and I think because it can present a cure to the opioid crisis, people are really scared to touch Ibogaine. Now and then you hear of clinical trials that are popping up. I believe there are some clinical trials happening in the UK at the moment. There are also quite a few non-psychoactive derivatives that people are working on. A lot of it's happening in secret and we really don't have a lot of information. There's also obviously Deborah Mash in the US is working on 18MC, which is a non-psychoactive version of Ibogaine, claiming to be able to do what Ibogaine does for opioids, for instance, without the psychoactive experience, which I have some very strong opinions about. I think that the psychoactive experience is an integral part of the Ibogaine journey and really what allows you to gain perspective on your own situation. So it would be very interesting to see once those substances are trialed, how they fare.
Thank you, Marty. That's really a great explanation. Thank you so much. Also, Ibogaine is controversial. I mean, I think the pharmaceutical lobby does not want Ibogaine because they've known about it since 1962, when Howard Lotsof discovered that Ibogaine cured his addiction. He just took it for kicks. And even with the psychedelic renaissance, Ibogaine is getting very little press. And I think that has something to do with the pharmaceutical lobby.
Yep.
I think we need to move on to the next speaker.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.